100% of the people who stayed for more than one appointment, we had a second outcome measure for. So it left me with a real dilemma. How can you make a reasonable comparison between data where you've got 100% inclusive data against only 39%? You see what the problem was? And it meant, of course, that it was comparing apples and elephants. The things were not comparable. And I actually didn't know what to do. For 18 months, I thought, what am I going to do? Because it's just not going to be a fair representation to do that. We were, at that point, the only people in the country, to my awareness, who were actually robustly measuring session by session by session. Now, IAPT, it was part of the remit of IAPT that they were obliged to measure session by session by session using GAD7 and PHQ-9. And I got the answer to what I needed to do when the first IAPT paper was published, because now I had something to reflect against. And luckily, they had in Doncaster, which was the two pilot sites. Incidentally, the University of York was very involved in deciding on the measures that were going to be used in IAPT. And Doncaster and Newham were the two pilot sites where they measured all of these clients robustly, session by session by session. But thankfully, a cohort were measured with CORE as well, because in the early days, they were also using CORE. This led to an international collaboration between myself, a researcher from Leeds, and a researcher from University of Medicine, who was an independent, nothing to do with human givens. It was very important to me to have people investigating the data who had no affiliation, no association with it whatsoever. So we were able to then write a paper together to benchmark the Luton data against the published studies from the early IAPT data. Do you understand? Are you with me? Okay. So that paper was finished last April 2010. It then went in for peer review. It took 5 months to come back, came back in August, and actually it was very good. As I've learned about this peer review process, they never say they'll publish it, but they say if there's this change and that change and this change, we'll consider it. But in fact, the changes were quite minor. So we turned the paper around. We heard back in October, turned it around and got it back very, very quickly again. And lo and behold, the day before the Human Givens Conference in November, I got the news that the paper was accepted. Amazingly, that was like, I don't know, the 5th of November or something like that. Here we are in February, and the paper still is not available. There's no hold up from my side. It's simply to do with the order of sequence with Wiley, the publishers. But literally any day now, the final paper will be available. As soon as it's available online, it's called in press, and then it can be cited and it can be used to go to GPs and demonstrate it and all the rest of it. So it's very valuable to have a proper peer-reviewed publication, you know. So it is really, really good. The other thing about this is that getting the first paper is the hardest thing of all, because as I was saying, back in 08, 09, I didn't know what to do, because we had nothing to act as a sort of a template for how to write a paper, really, what to compare it against. But now we have, because every following paper will reflect back on the process of the first paper. Do you see? So it really was an enormous leap forward. The other thing is that because it was a fairly high-ranking journal, it will capture international attention, because there's very little in the literature about practice research networks. So that was really, really good. Now, if I knew then what I now know, what I would have done back in 2007 is I would have said, having said, look guys, we need to do more than ORS, we need to do CORE as well. What I should probably have done, quite honestly, is actually said, you know what, we need to do GAD7 and PHQ-9. Because the problem is that when you don't have identical measures, it's, in spite of the fact that all of these measures correlate very well with each other, it's difficult to talk the same language, right? And so what I've come to realize all this journey down the track is that actually, certainly amongst some of us, particularly those who are interested in influencing public bodies, so particularly those who are interested in influencing the NHS, doctors, etc., etc. Doctors are very familiar with GAD7 and PHQ-9. In fact, it's part of their QOFs that they fill these things in. So if they fill in PHQ-9s, if they identify people with depression with PHQ-9, they get extra brownie points and earn some extra money, so it's very valuable to them to do that. So they're very familiar with GAD7 and PHQ-9. So actually, what I am now saying from today is that people could think about, in their situation, whether it's appropriate for them to possibly move to GAD7 and PHQ-9 as the measures of choice. So that's the situation with that. Now the other side of this is the actual process of gathering data. So if you can imagine, one has everything from people who are happy to work with a computer directly with their client, either entering the answers to the questions directly into the program as the client is answering them, or having the client fill them in. So some services, for example, clients would come in and at the appointment they would go to a computer if they had 5 minutes before the start of the treatment session to fill in online the answers to the questions, and then there's no paper involved. But then you go to other services where people think, oh, I'm not on the internet, I don't want to have a computer in the room, I feel it's just another thing that gets in the way, so what I'll do is I'll use paper measures, and I'll use them. I'm happy to use the paper measures, I like using the measures, and I've got all this information in paper format. But think about it. You see 10 clients, 15 clients, in some places 20 clients a week. At the end of the week you have a heck of a lot of paper. And if you've had 34 questions filled in by the client and you now have to go to the computer and put 34 different things in, what happens is, Gail's nodding her head, is that you think, I just can't do that. I want to have a life. I'm already devoting a huge amount of time to working as a practitioner. It's just all too much. And what I've realized is that over time is that there's a huge body of practitioners who have no problems with using the measures with clients, but have huge problems with trying to get the data into the system.